In the spotlight tonight, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie takes a free ride at taxpayer expense. That's after calling for workers to give up benefits in the name of shared sacrifice and cutting the cost of government. Yesterday, Christie decided to avoid traffic and take his state's brand new $12 million state police helicopter instead, and take it to his son's high school baseball game. The governor landed on a sports field next to the game, and then got into a black car with tinted windows to ride all of about 100 yards to the baseball field. Christie and his wife then left during the fifth inning, getting back into the car and then back into the helicopter, which was designed for Homeland Security duties and transporting critically injured patients. Christie's next stop was the governor's mansion to meet with Republican donors from Iowa who were hoping to draft him into the 2012 presidential race. Bruce Rastetter, an Iowa energy executive, said Christie was uniquely suited to carry the party's message in 2012. Christie has pledged to cut what he calls wasteful spending, including all of the money for New Jersey's Office of Climate and Energy. On Thursday, Christie abandoned the Northeast's 10-state cap-and-trade system to lower carbon dioxide from power plants. Christie's political posturing for the national stage could hurt him on the state level. Democratic New Jersey State Assemblyman John Wisniewski criticized the governor's use of the helicopter. The people of the state of New Jersey should not be required to pick up the tab so he can meet with Iowa donors. He's a governor who, as U.S. attorney, would rail against elected officials blurring the line. But this governor has selective memory and selective outrage. Joining me now is Steve Kornacki, politics editor for Salon.com. Thanks for joining me tonight, Steve.
Sure.
Steve, is this yet another instance of Republicans looking for another candidate to save them from the bad candidates? And if they ever got this candidate, they would actually then discover what's bad about him.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that. The grass is always greener on the other side when it comes to unannounced presidential candidates. And I do think the interest that's out there in Chris Christie, a guy who's been governor for less than 2 years, and before that really didn't hold major office, a major elected office at least, speaks in a large measure to the discomfort that Republicans have with their field. But I do think it also speaks to some of the political strengths that Christie's shown in the last couple of years. I mean, he's a genuine sensation among sort of the Republican grassroots on YouTube, on cable news, Republican, Fox Cable News at least. He has strong communication skills generally. When you compare him to a guy like Mitt Romney, who can come across as pretty phony. When you compare him to a guy like Tim Pawlenty, who has a problem with being really too boring and too stiff. Chris Christie, say what you will about him, it comes across like he's got some blood in his veins. So I think there is some genuine interest in Chris Christie himself, among Republicans. But I do think there really is this thirst for another candidate. And you're right. I mean, we saw that when Wesley Clark tried to get in the Democratic race late in 2004. We saw it when Fred Thompson tried to get in the Republican race late in 2008. When these guys get in, they don't usually look as well. But I do think he's a guy to keep an eye on, at least.
I think what's important about the helicopter episode, in addition to its unethical nature, is that it shows, in fact, that this is somebody who's not ready for prime time, who doesn't understand what it's like to be under close inspection, and that, no, you don't take the state helicopter to your kid's baseball game or take the state helicopter to a political event that has nothing to do with governing the state of New Jersey. I think this little episode exposes the kind of thing that people are glossing over with Christie.
I think that's true in a way. You can say that this does demonstrate something about his judgment and judgment that would be an issue in a presidential election, just in terms of the kind of decisions he makes. I would say somewhat in his defense, just having, somebody who lived in New Jersey and covered New Jersey politics, the governor takes the helicopter somewhere he shouldn't story is sort of a freebie that every political party gets when the other, party's guy is in the governor's office. I remember covering, one of the first things I covered in New Jersey was Jim McGreevey with all of his inappropriate helicopter trips. But you're right, there's a jump to the national stage, and this stuff just doesn't fly there. But I think the real risk to a story like this for Christie, when we talk about the national stage, is this really sort of underscores a balancing act, a unique balancing act that he faces among presidential prospects, and that is he's the Republican governor, the conservative Republican governor of a very blue state. When he was elected in 2009, he won by 4.5 points. That marked the second biggest landslide for a Republican in New Jersey in 37 years. That is the margin for error he has. It's basically non-existent. So a story like this, if there's a Democratic governor, a story like this isn't necessarily going to hurt that much in public opinion in New Jersey. When you're Chris Christie, you're a conservative Republican, it hurts a lot because you don't have much of a margin for error. And when you're talking about going national, you're talking about taking these positions like you outlined on climate change that are going to really help you on the national stage and the Republican side, that erodes things further. So Chris Christie, looking ahead to 2013 and what right now would be an iffy campaign for re-election at best, he's got to be very careful as he shows any interest in the national stage, because everything he does nationally hurts him in the state. And I can tell you, this guy spent a decade of his life trying to be governor. He loves the job. I think he'd like to be president, but he doesn't want to lose the governorship.
Yeah, his popularity in New Jersey among the voters who are actually paying attention to him on a day-to-day basis is very, very low. He's dropped down to a 40% approval rating. He's got a 45% disapproval rating now in New Jersey. The New Jersey polls show that Barack Obama would beat him in New Jersey. So this notion, I've found this notion that these guys in Iowa have and these other people have about Christie is ludicrous, because the voters who are actually giving him a close look really don't like what they're seeing. Why wouldn't that be the same thing that happened when you move out onto the campaign trail?
Well, again, you would look at New Jersey, you would say it's not necessarily representative of the country when it comes to, comes to political opinion. It's a state that last voted for a Republican at the presidential level in 1988. It's a state that hasn't elected a single Republican to the United States Senate since 1972, and that Republican, Clifford Case, was essentially a Democrat. He was more liberal, than most of the Democrats in the United States Senate. So it's a very liberal state, a state in a lot of ways that's gotten a lot more liberal in recent years. So the simple fact that Chris Christie could win there in the first place, granted, in a strong Republican climate, said something for him.
Steve Kornacki, politics editor for Salon.com and authority on New Jersey politics. Thanks for joining us tonight, Steve.